It was late on the evening of July the 26th, 1911, when Mr. Howard Marshall Wilson and his wife were distracted by what they described as a carriage stopping close to their home on Hopkins Avenue in Norwood, Ohio. When they stepped out onto their front porch, they saw three people get out of the vehicle, two men and a woman. They walked closely together, one man on either side of her, and it looked to the Wilsons as if the woman was being held upright. The three proceeded towards a ravine, which was near a northern outlet of what was known as the Bloody Run sewer, close to the Norwood-Cincinnati border. A few minutes later, only the men returned, got into the vehicle and drove away. Although a strange sight, the Wilsons thought little more of it. "9 days later, on the night of Friday, August the 4th, three young boys, Irwin Hughes, Henry Parsons and Edward Gill, who were in search of a lost ball, peered into the open sewer, and then, as a dare, stepped into the tunnel and walked a short distance. That's when they saw the headless body of a woman lying in the shallow water. When Irwin Hughes returned to his home on Wayland Avenue and told his parents about what they had seen, he was chastised for telling lies, before his father finally agreed to follow him to the sewer. There he too saw the headless woman. She had lacerations on her arms, and the body appeared to be secured by a rope. Once an investigation was underway, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson of Hopkins Avenue were the first people to come forward with their story. The notion that the Wilsons had witnessed the victim being led away by two men 9 days earlier seemed likely given the location, but the pathologist, Dr. Theodore Bange, immediately cast doubt over its plausibility, because according to him, the woman had been dead for a month. She was 5 foot 8 inches tall, weighed 145 pounds, and Dr. Bange believed she was between 25 and 35 years old. He didn't think she had been beheaded by the killer, suggesting that her throat had merely been cut, the head then likely separated through decomposition. It had come away close to the shoulders, exposing the collarbone and one shoulder blade. Any other external marks and lacerations, Dr. Bange said, were likely to have occurred after death. The body was clad in a bluish-green skirt of heavy material, a ribbed undervest, a lace-embroidered corset, and a black and white polka-dot skirt. There were no shoes or stockings. On Sunday, August the 6th, 5 people, the mother, the uncle, 2 brothers and the landlady of a woman named Bertha Courtney, believed that it was the body of Bertha based on her build and the clothes she wore. Described as a white woman of the underworld by the press, Bertha Courtney, who had turned to prostitution in 1909, had not been seen by her family for months. She was last seen by her friends in the company of her 36-year-old husband, Charles Jones. Bertha and Charles had married on February 28, 1910, but the relationship was said to be a volatile one, with Jones often being physically and verbally abusive towards Bertha. The couple had lived together at 2914 Park Avenue since July of 1911, a boarding house in the Walnut Hills area of Cincinnati. According to John and Matilda Tilton, who ran the lodgings, Bertha enjoyed her time there. At least she did while Jones was away, and she began to look to Matilda as a kind of mother figure. Matilda was a religious woman, and Bertha, who wanted to change her way of life, turned to her for guidance, often asking her to recite verses from the Bible. Mrs. Tilton told Bertha that she was too good a woman for Charles Jones, and that she should leave him. She even said as much to Jones himself one night, a potentially dangerous remark that infuriated him. However, Mrs. Tilton also said that Jones and Courtney had at times been affectionate, but it was Jones's jealousy and unwillingness to allow his wife to bond with other people that was the root of their troubles. Things came to a head on July the 11th, 1911, when Bertha, in the absence of Jones, packed her bags and told Matilda that she was returning to her mother in Hinton, Kentucky. Although sad to see her go, Matilda was happy that she'd made her decision. When Charles Jones returned home that evening and asked her where Bertha was, Matilda Tilton, somewhat unwisely, was only too happy to let him know that she had left him. But unbeknownst to Mrs. Tilton, Bertha hadn't returned to Kentucky, something that Jones appeared to have known. The next day he paid a visit to 417 George Street, a place described in newspapers as a resort where Bertha had previously worked and had made many friends. As Jones suspected, she was there. She had turned to Madam Maud Clark and the other women at the house for protection. Charles Jones, accompanied by a police officer, came to the house insisting on seeing his wife. After a private conversation between the two, Bertha left with Jones. No one knew where they had gone, and according to all witnesses at the time, she hadn't been seen since. The last confirmed sighting of Charles Jones was 2 weeks later, on July the 26th. That day he had appeared at the offices of building contractors Morse Coney, where he had worked, to collect $2 in wages. His colleagues said that he appeared excited and told them that he had to leave at once because his sister had recently died and he wanted to attend the funeral in Kentucky. With Charles Jones being the only suspect in Bertha's death and the manhunt now underway, aspects of his past life came back into focus. In response to the newspaper coverage, local man Oliver Smith came forward to offer his services to Cincinnati police because on January the 25th, only 6 months prior, his wife, Clementine, had been beaten to death in her bed at their home at 411 Plum Street in downtown Cincinnati. It was a brutal attack that left her skull crushed. At the time of the murder, Charles Jones had boarded with them. The Clementine Smith murder was an intriguing and sad story that dominated regional newspapers for some time. Both Charles Jones and Oliver Smith were arrested and questioned for the murder of Mrs. Smith, but Jones was released after fiercely maintaining his innocence at the inquest and saying that he knew that Mr. Smith had killed his own wife. Smith claimed that he was not home that day and pointed out that Jones often argued with him and his wife about rent owed. On the day his wife was killed, Jones' rent was due. It was Oliver Smith's belief that after he had failed to pay again, an argument ensued that led to Jones killing Mrs. Smith. $30 was also said to be missing from the house that day. However, Oliver Smith failed to convince authorities and was jailed for 6 months before an alibi eventually came forward in July. Charles Jones was an ex-convict who, since his release from prison in 1910, had lived in various cities in Ohio. Police now believe that he may have been responsible for the deaths of 5 other people in South Cummingsville, Cincinnati. The victims were Lulu Mueller, Alma Steinweg, Mary Hackney, Mary MacDonald, Anna Lloyd, and one unnamed man. 3 of these murders happened during a time when Jones lived in Durr Street in South Cummingsville. The other 2 were linked to him through modus operandi similarities. In 1905, Jones had shot and attempted to kill police officer Frank Chase, a crime he had served 5 years for in Columbus. He was also arrested for attacking a woman in Norwood, but was later released. A photograph and description of Jones was shared to authorities in the surrounding states, but the hunt for Jones soon became a nationwide operation. On August the 11th, Chief of Cincinnati Police, William H. Jackson, received a letter dated August the 9th, with a postage stamp from 840 West 8th Avenue. Part of that letter reads, "Dear Sir, I am writing to you to let you know that I am still in the city, nor do I expect to leave. Mr. Jackson, I did not kill that woman, although it is true I made a number of threats, but I never intended on doing such a thing. I did do one thing though, I made her leave the house and not let her come back. What became of her and where she went I do not know and don't care, for I have washed my hands of her. And now I see you find her body in a sewer and charge me with the murder. That's something I would not be guilty of. But you police seem to think that I did it, as if there is not 100 people who would have done it besides me. She had trouble with a white man once. She said he told her that if she did not stop living with me, he would kill her someday. It seems he kept his word. Now, in regards to the Smith murder at 411 Plum Street, I did not have anything to do with that either. I am right here in this town and intend to stay until I see this thing through. I also defy any of you police to attempt to arrest me. Charles Jones." The immediate response from the police was that the letter was a ruse. written either by a fanatic looking for attention or by someone writing on behalf of Jones in the hope that it would satisfy police that he was innocent and still living in Cincinnati, when in fact he was putting as much distance as possible between himself and the crime. The police department in Norwood confirmed that Jones' literacy skills were poor. This was realised following a previous arrest. He could, however, write his name. The signature on the letter was compared to those found on past receipts and work documents belonging to Jones, but the penmanship bore no resemblance at all. The first of several reports regarding Jones's whereabouts came in on Saturday, August 5th, when a man believed to be Jones was seen asking strangers for money in the city of Athens, telling them he needed funds to get to Canada. One of those people, Mr. P. H. Cooley, came forward after seeing a police-circulated picture of Jones. Although the stranger told Mr. Cooley that he was from Illinois, Cooley swore it was the man he'd seen in the picture. Other spurious sightings of Jones were reported in the Ohio cities of Dayton, Hamilton, Youngsville, and Piqua, and a man was even wrongly arrested in Carrollton, Kentucky. There was another arrest in Paris, Kentucky, of a man who gave his details as Will Jones from Cincinnati. He had threatened a woman with a gun on the corner of 10th and Pleasant Street. However, after initial suspicions by the Kentucky police, he was not believed to be Charles Jones. There was another wrongful arrest as far away as Binghamton, New York, and in Detroit, Michigan, an innocent man was arrested after boarding a Cincinnati-bound freight train. Charles Jones always said that he was originally from Lima, Ohio. From his marriage certificate, police found that his father's name was Manuel Jones from Lima, but when they investigated and spoke to the black communities there, they found that no one had heard of Manuel or Charles Jones. People who knew Bertha and Charles also spoke of a brother of Charles, who lived in Cincinnati, but when he was investigated, it seemed that he too had left the city. There were a few theories as to why Charles Jones might have wanted to kill Bertha. He may have disapproved of her working as a prostitute, or maybe she did have plans to return to her mother in Kentucky and Jones didn't want her to go. Another was the possibility that Bertha knew about his past crimes, and as you'll remember, in the wake of Bertha's discovery, Jones became a suspect in 5 other murders. If he was responsible for any of these and she knew about them, maybe she threatened to report him to the police during one of their many arguments. This brings us to the unsolved death of John Johnson. His body was found on May the 7th, 1911, in what is now known as Mitchell Woods Memorial Park. It was originally thought that he had taken his own life because of an apparent suicide note in his pocket. However, a man named Julius Head, who was the proprietor of the Iron Steps Saloon at 419 West 6th Avenue, told police of a conversation he had had with a man named Charles Lewis. Julius Head said that Lewis, who was a friend of both Bertha Courtney and Charles Jones, told him that Jones had killed Johnson and staged a suicide, and that Bertha also knew about it. He said that she feared her husband would kill her to keep her from exposing him. Jones's guilt in this case is by no means certain, of course. The falsified suicide note is especially telling if Jones was illiterate. Then there was the matter of Charles Johnson, no relation to John, who had been shot through the heart and left in a wooded area close to Clifton Avenue, 5 miles north of downtown Cincinnati. It was realised that Charles Johnson had once lived at the same Park Avenue address as Bertha Courtney and Charles Jones, and that there had been an altercation between the two men after Johnson had freed Bertha from a locked room that Jones had forced her into following one of their arguments. According to other occupants of the house, following Johnson's intervention, Jones had threatened to kill him. For a few days it looked, on the surface at least, as if Cincinnati police knew that the body belonged to Bertha. As far as they were concerned, this was confirmed on Sunday, August the 4th, when Bertha's 2 brothers, mother and uncle paid a visit to the morgue. Her mother, who struggled with the task, fainted at the sight of the hands, which looked as if they'd been partially eaten by rats. Despite her obvious distress, she declared that there was no doubt that the body belonged to Bertha. Moreover, Bertha's landlady, Matilda Tilton, said that she recognised the white polka-dot garment she wore as the one that she had stitched herself. But when Bertha's brothers, Jesse and Leslie Courtney, later spoke to journalists, Jesse admitted that there was little about the body's appearance to suggest it was his sister, and Leslie Courtney made the remark that he hadn't viewed the body at all. This is despite both brothers previously telling police that the body belonged to their sister. Leslie said that after his mother had identified the body, the police were steadfast in their belief and had told him the body was that of Bertha, so that's what he accepted. And the doubts didn't end there. More statements came from Bertha's associates, some of whom had lived with her at the resort on George Street. One of them claimed to have seen Bertha since August the 4th, the day the body was found. A man who had visited George Street, possibly a customer, also said that he had seen Bertha at the house after August the 4th. And another friend of hers claimed that Bertha said that she was going to leave Cincinnati to a place far away from her husband. By 1912, police even stated publicly that if Jones was found, it would be impossible to charge him with the woman's murder given the testimony of these people. However, they said if Jones could be tracked down and held for another crime he was suspected of, and the word of his arrest reached Bertha, if indeed she was alive, she may feel safe enough to come out of hiding. One glaring issue, of course, was the missing head. As mentioned, it was believed by the pathologist that the body had not been fully decapitated at the time of death. It was his theory, going by the severe marks, that the throat had been deeply cut, and then due to extensive decomposition, animal feeding, or even the sudden rush of water following recent heavy rainfall, it had been torn away. One detective by the name of Crawford believed that the entire body had been disposed of in a manhole in the Walnut Hills area, close to Bertha and Charles' home on Park Avenue, and then with the help of the heavy rainfall, the corpse had been carried to the location where it was found. As mentioned, Charles Jones had worked for the Moores Coney Building Contractors Company. He was said to drive a company vehicle which was sometimes seen outside the Park Avenue house. Police theorised that this vehicle may have been used to store, transport and dump Bertha's body, and that Jones may have had help in doing so. This certainly ties in well with the original witness statement given by Mr. Howard Marshall Wilson, mentioned at the beginning of the story. If you remember, Marshall and his wife said that they had seen a, quote, carriage pull up close to their home on Hopkins Avenue before two men and a woman exited the vehicle. The woman, they said, looked as if she was being held up by the two men as they walked towards the ravine close to the sewer outlet where the body was found. The men then returned to the vehicle alone, according to the Wilsons. A compelling theory, but because the pathologist said the woman had been dead for a month, and the Wilsons' sighting was on July the 26th, 9 days before the discovery, their statement was all but disregarded. Additionally, July the 26th was the last confirmed sighting of Jones. As mentioned, he was visiting his workplace to retrieve his wages and told his colleagues he was leaving for Kentucky. Assuming for a moment that the pathologist's time of death was inaccurate, could this have been Jones and an accomplice transporting Bertha to the sewer, her head then being removed and discarded? Or maybe they took it with them. Mr. Wilson himself mentioned that he watched them through, quote, the gloom of night, so if they had concealed a human head on their return to the vehicle, could it have been missed by the Wilsons? Also, there was no mention of how far away the Wilsons were stood. From what I've read, that point of the sewer in 1911 was an outlet, so the head would not have been washed into the sewer system. The police confirmed that after a thorough search of the Bloody Run sewer all the way to the drainage pool at Mill Creek, followed by a mile-long dredging of the creek, no head or other items of clothing were found. Of course, the alleged sighting of Bertha after the discovery of the body threw everything into confusion, and police were forced to consider that it may not be her. There were other considerations to be made with this in mind. Bertha Courtney had married twice before. Both her former husbands still lived in Kentucky, where the Courtney family were from. Her first husband, George Farmer, from whom she had divorced, lived in Hinton. Her second husband, Harvey Sebastian, was from Erlanger, and as far as police could see, there was no record of a divorce. In fact, it was discovered that Bertha sometimes returned to Kentucky to stay with Sebastian when she needed to get away from Charles Jones. It was later realised that she had illegally married Jones under the name Bertha Arnold. When we consider the witness statements that mention Bertha's desire to get away from Jones, and the fact that she had a second husband whom she sometimes ran to, it becomes clear that she may well have returned to Harvey Sebastian. He lived in Kentucky and so did her family, so it would have been a perfect place for her to return. This being said, Bertha Courtney was never found alive by police in Kentucky, Ohio, or anywhere else. However, in October of 1913, the Cincinnati Tribune reported that a man calling himself William Campbell was arrested and charged with the murder of Charles Meyer in Montreal. The assailant had cut Meyer's throat after an argument and donned his hat after the crime. When a Canadian detective saw a picture of Charles Jones printed in a police magazine, he was convinced that Campbell was in fact Jones. Following a lengthy correspondence between Ohio and Montreal law enforcement, it was decided that the wanted Cincinnati man had been found. In the same article that I read this, the narrative had reverted back to the lady in the sewer as definitely being Bertha, despite the previous doubts. The killer of Charles Meyer, believed to be Charles Jones, was sentenced to hang on December 31st, 1913. This is the last mention of Charles Jones or Bertha Courtney I could find anywhere. While the whereabouts of both Charles Jones and Bertha Courtney were being pondered by the authorities in August of 1911, the body found in the sewer was laid to rest on August the 7th, 3 days after its discovery. Bertha's mother said that she wanted to take the body to Kentucky for burial, but she could not afford the cost. The body was instead buried at Potter's Field, Gurley Road, Cincinnati. The funeral, attended by Bertha's mother and one brother, was paid for by the city. 3 other women attended but refused to give their names. There was a theory that Bertha's family were helping her to escape, so therefore made up the body identification. If this theory were true, the fact that her mother wanted to take the body back to Kentucky seems like an excessive cover. We're told that she also attended the funeral. Of course, she may have just gone through with it to help further convince those looking for Bertha that her daughter was dead. This is just another possibility and an impossible mystery that was never truly solved. Before I finish, I'd like one more time to take you back to the beginning of the story for a moment, to the night of July the 26th, 1911, when Mr. Harold Marshall Wilson had seen a young lady being escorted by 2 men on the Hopkins Avenue. This led to speculation that the woman was Bertha Courtney moments before she was killed. Interestingly, on August the 6th, it was reported that on July the 30th, 4 days after this sighting, a young boy found a gold ring inscribed with the name Carrie Smith. This just made me wonder if the ring had anything to do with Clementine Smith, whose murder led to both her husband and Charles Jones being suspects. Of course, the name is different, but could it be that she was known as Carrie? Or maybe the ring's inscription was worn, so the correct name couldn't be made out. If Charles Jones had been responsible for the murder of Mrs. Smith, and had been one of the men seen that night by the Bloody Run sewer, could he have disposed of her ring at the same time he disposed of Bertha Courtney? It's just a thought. A tenuous link maybe, probably quite a reach, but I thought I'd mention it anyway as a closing thought.